Now, on New Year's Day in Turkey, there was a mass shooting at a nightclub, a popular nightclub, and they have videos because nowadays everybody has their little smartphones and or their phones with the cameras in them. So, of course, you had people taking videos of this incident, or this shooting. And one of the videos that was out there was a video circulating that was supposedly from this nightclub, which the nightclub was called Reina, I think it was. Anyway, so they had a video from this nightclub that showed a young woman who was on the ground I think it was in the bathroom, or I'm not sure, it was somewhere. She was on the ground, looks like she was face down, hair over her face, and blood, looked like blood coming out of her head or something, and she's kind of gasping. And it was really a really horrible video. Now I'm sure I know you're not allowed to post it on YouTube, so because they removed it. If you look at the video, try to find it on YouTube, you'll see a lot of these videos are getting removed when people post it. So you're not allowed to post it, but I'm sure you could probably find it on other sites as well. So anyway, so this is what happens when you have these very tragic incidents. You have all these people with cameras. Someone's taking a picture of it. Some people are taking videos of this stuff now. And let's see. There were other violent incidents soon after New Year's. There was, I think, bombings or attack on a police checkpoint or something in Iraq. Then there was in Brazil. In Brazil, there was a mass shooting at a club or a party. Someone I think it shot 11 people. I'm not sure if he killed them or injured or just wounded 11. Anyways, that was not a political thing. Like the Turkey attack was a political type of thing, terrorist type of attack. But the shooting in Brazil was more of a personal thing. Apparently, it was something to do with a man who was angry at his ex-wife. I think the shooter may have committed suicide. It was kind of like a murder-suicide, except he shot out instead of just killing the wife like a lot of these kinds of people do. Like in a lot of cases, you see a man shooting his wife, then committing suicide, or shooting his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend or whatever, committing suicide. This guy shot 11 people, and he basically shot a whole bunch of other people who probably didn't have anything to do with the situation. But anyway, so that's what happened in Brazil. Now, outside of the international stories that you see in a lot of the major international English language news outlets, outside of those major stories like the Turkish nightclub shooting and the Brazil shooting, you have a lot of local murders, homicides, so-called normal murders. I'm sure a lot of those took place as well on New Year's Day or the New Year's Eve or the day after New Year's. So if you look at in a lot of the cities where there's a lot of homicides, say in a lot of United States cities, Chicago or New Orleans or New York City or St. Louis, Miami, Los Angeles, etc., or in Latin American cities, or maybe in Russia or South Africa, places where you tend to see higher homicide rates. I'm sure there's been a lot of murders in those places as well, but you don't necessarily hear about the average, say the so-called normal gang-related murder or robbery or domestic violence or police shooting. You don't hear about that stuff in the national, international news. You don't hear about it on CNN or in BBC or whatever. But you would have to go and look in the local news. Look at some of these local news newspapers or local news channels or online on the websites for the local news from different places, and then you'll find all these murders that have been happening, which I'm sure have happened on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and so on. So for example, in Chicago, apparently there have been two separate police shootings of unarmed civilians in Chicago since New Year's Day. So between January 1st and January 2nd, 2017, within the first 2 days of 2017, there's already been two police shootings in Chicago. I don't know how many shootings there have been of civilians killing other civilians. I'm not sure about that, but I'm sure there's been some of those as well in Chicago, and as well in different cities, in other cities as well. So there's a lot of violence going on, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure that if you look at today, or I'm pretty sure today, the modern world today, 2017 is as peaceful, probably much more peaceful than it has been at any other time, or in most other times in history, in human history. So if you look at the percentage of, if you look at the number of people who are being, say, murdered in 2016, or who have been murdered in the last week or the last few days, as a percentage of the total world population. So the world population is maybe 6-7 billion people. What percent, if you look at the percentage of people who've been murdered, or who have been victims of violence, who've been killed in any kind of way, whether terrorism, by police, by criminals, by any or domestic violence. If you look at the amount of killings, I'm pretty certain that the percentage of human beings who are being killed today, 2017 or 2016 and 2017, I'm pretty sure that the percentage is much lower than what it was in, say, 1945 or 1930 or 1900 or 1850 or 1750 or 1500 or 1000 or 1000 BC or whatever. I'm sure that the violent crime rate has probably dropped significantly, because historically, let's say early Neolithic times, when you had, or early medieval times or ancient times or whatever, if you could have two farmers get into a fight, and one guy kills the other guy with a pitchfork. And that was probably fairly common. At least I read a book about Europe. They were saying that kind of stuff was pretty common. Just the regular peasant people, they would get into an argument and kill each other. That was pretty normal back in medieval Europe. And now it isn't that common. You don't see people just getting into arguments and killing each other very often. You do see some people doing it, but you don't see it's not that common, at least not in Europe. Maybe in some other parts of the world it's more common, or at least not in, say, Western Europe. It's not that common anymore. And you don't see wars as much in a lot of parts of the world. You don't see wars in, for example, Europe used to have wars all the time up until since the Second World War, there have not been that many wars in Europe. There was the Greek Civil War, there was the Yugoslav Civil War in the 90s. There's been the Ukraine conflict recently, in recent years. But in generally speaking, Europe hasn't had all those big wars that it used to have. They had 30 Years' War and the 100 Years' War and the War of Spanish Succession and Austrian Succession and Napoleonic Wars, French Revolutionary Wars, a Franco-Prussian War. Europe used to have wars all the time. They were always fighting some group, some country or some lord or whatever. They were always fighting each other historically. And now they don't fight it. Now they don't have all those wars anymore. Now you have the European Union. Most of those countries get along. Even Britain, even with Britain leaving the European Union, they're not going to war with Europe. So the world is a lot more peaceful than it used to be. And you don't have, um, in some African countries, you have wars going on and you have civil wars and all that stuff, like South Sudan. But historically, they used to have wars all the time in Africa. In the Americas, before Columbus, the indigenous people were always fighting each other. In colonial times, the Europeans were fighting each other, the French and the British. Every time they had a war in Europe, it would spill over to the Americas, and then you'd see them, they'd be fighting over different Caribbean islands, fighting over North America, and the French and Indian wars, fighting in South America. And now you don't see so many wars anymore. So a lot of countries in the world have become a lot more peaceful. You don't see so many wars between different countries. They're relatively uncommon. There's a civil war in Syria now, but you don't, if you think about it, it hasn't been there has not been a war between two different countries for a relatively long time. It's not very common for that to happen anymore. So the world has become a lot more peaceful, probably less violent crime. So overall, even though you hear these stories in the media about terrorism and all this stuff and people getting crime, this is probably a lot less common than it used to be. The crime, violence, a lot less common.